And on the point of me calling it fan fiction, I want to make sure that it's clear that I don't mean to be pejorative when I say that. And I think that can get confusing because I mean, some people do take that as pejorative, and I don't mean that in any way. In a sense, any kind of adaptation is a form of fan fiction. I mean, you could use some funny examples like Shakespeare did not write Hamlet on his own. He used a prior play. I think they call it Hamlet. And so, Shakespeare can do adaptations / fan fiction or whatever. I think everybody can. So
there's a gigantic fan fiction community out there, and I would think that community would not consider that to be a pejorative at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it as he's a fan. He's not just taking a story and adapting it, but this story has meant a lot to him as in the audience, as a fan, and then now that he's a professional, he wants to do something with it.
Well, let's talk about the look and the style, the genre of it, because the 1922 film is usually characterized as being an expressionist horror. Do you see that following through with the 1979 Herzog version and with the Eggers version most recently?
I think it's important to set the record straight or make things clear about the three different eras. So I think Nosferatu is identified as a quintessential expressionist film. I think I saw a book titled Expressionist Films, and it has the famous shadow of Nosferatu coming up the stairs. So it's a huge icon of expressionist film. However, if you look at it more carefully, the film historians talk about different points in the expressionist film in Germany, or more clearly Weimar Germany, which is the era we're talking about. And a lot of people think there's only one pure expressionist film, and that would be the Cabinet of Caligari, about 1920. And very quickly, a few films were made after that, which didn't succeed. And most filmmakers came to the conclusion that it was very difficult to do anything in that pure art movement. And what happens is there's a very quick transition from the idea of pure expressionism to using expressionism in a stylistic way to achieve a purpose in a certain way. And so you already have that happening before they make Nosferatu, and you see this going on in the films at that time, and then later on, when these German filmmakers moved to Hollywood, they take that style with them. So I think it's just very helpful to understand that the larger sense, this is Weimar period, and expressionist as an art movement is one thing, and expressionist stylistic devices for use for more traditional movie is obviously related, but it's really very separate. And so, we're talking about an era, a history, a film style. When you use expressionism, it's helpful to describe what area of your expression you're talking about, and that will make it clear to everybody.
Well, maybe I'm not quite following you, Lokke. Are you saying that Nosferatu is expressionist or is not expressionist?
Well, I would say it's not. I mean, it is. The story itself is something called a Biedermeier genre. And the evidence for this is as follows. It's set very deliberately in 1838, which is exactly the Biedermeier period, and it's the height of the Romantic era. It's very equivalent to the Regency in England. Everybody's exhausted from the Napoleonic Wars, and there's a lot of pressure to return to normalcy. There's a lot of discussions or issues in that era about status. There's a lot of importance about being higher in the status, and you see the plots in Murnau's film very much are the engine for that plot is exactly what I'm talking about. Hutter has this need for increased status, and that moves the whole story. This is very much different than, let's say, a post-war Germany era, or even a 1900s Germany where the history of Germany was completely in flux at that time. So So in terms of the story, in terms of what's going on there, it's very much a Regency novel, you might say. The Biedermeier period is thought of as architecture or furniture, but the genre is very thorough in the stories that take place there, where there's an era of normalcy, and then something comes in to the town or village to upset everything, and then the rest of the story is what happens afterwards. So to recap that, a lot of what you see in Murnau's Nosferatu is really a period piece of Biedermeier, but stylistically, it's a lot of expressionist techniques are used to create the mood and effect of this. And so, if you look at it from that way, it is very much fit the type of expressionism that was used in Germany at that time. So this is a situation where both things are correct. It's technically.
So if we were reading this script, if we were Murnau and we were handed the script in 1921, we would have said this looks to be Biedermeier.
Yeah.
But I'm going to make it look expressionist.
Well, everybody, you're right. So people caught on pretty quickly, only a year or two after Caligari, how hard it was to make the story. The story in Caligari is expressionist because it doesn't have any kind of resolution. And I could go into more detail. There's a lot about going in the story that has this lack of resolution. Or it's not even that, it's a suspended resolution. And that is what the heart of expressionism is. You don't even get close to a resolution. It gets completely suspended. So rather than trying to deal with a very intractable or very difficult problem, what they did find out, directors like Fritz Lang found out that you could use the gifts of expressionism in terms of film technique of high contrast lighting and various degrees to create an emotional viewpoint. So if you want to look at this more carefully, expressionism in that sense is heightened emotional qualities that the plastic qualities of the film itself gives the viewer, gives the audience. We feel the emotions going on in the people and the characters. So in that sense, it is expressionist because you're getting not a realistic view of the world, but one that's charged with heightened emotions.
Do you think the Herzog and the Eggers films are expressionist?
Well, so Herzog is, now this is just my opinion, comes in from the documentary door. He has, his style is much more of the 60s, 70s European filmmakers where they eschew the Hollywood classic continuity editing and typically edit and shoot their films in a very different way. And Herzog's film is more like that. I would say that as the film goes on, it becomes more like that. At the beginning, it's more straightforward, cut more like Murnau's film. But as you toward the end of the film, you get more into what I call Herzog world, where you have just a different way of looking at film. If you see films from that era, you'll see a lot of attention to detail other than straightforward Hollywood editing. And I say that not as a positive or negative, but that's Herzog's deal. The ending of Herzog's film is much more open ending, and I suppose you could make the argument that it's the ending. It could be more expressionist and that it's not clear resolution. So I think the answer is it depends what part of what you're watching you're talking about. And now we get to Eggers, and I think Eggers is very conscious of these issues, and he's as he talks about, he set his film in very clearly and very consciously this Biedermeier period, and their dresses and their costumes and so on are very reflective of that. And there's this beautiful shot of Ellen with the headband, which becomes this sort of screen around her, and I think that was Eggers' nod to all the shots of Orlok, in the arches. I think he said he didn't want it to take any deliberate shot, completely shot for shot. He wanted to have it going on, but not try to do the same picture, which I think is a smart idea.
Well, yeah. Because we remember how that went with Psycho when they did a shot-for-shot remake.
Exactly. So I think,
or more to the point, we don't remember because no one remembers that well that it was done.
No, right. Because I think what it does is pull you out of the movie. You're going, oh yeah, that shot was exactly the same. So I think he was very much aware of that. And while he would give suggestions to that effect, he deliberately took those scenes and did some switching so that you would see that, but it wouldn't be any direct reference.
You're right, because there were moments where, especially early in the film, with all the framing with archways, I kept thinking, oh, is that the exact same shot? And then after a while, I stopped asking myself that question, and I just let the movie kind of roll over me, because I couldn't, my brain didn't find a mirror image match for any of them. And so I stopped worrying about it, which maybe was the intent, that we not linger on, is this the exact same framing as was used in Murnau or not?
Yeah, exactly. I think that he was thinking the same thing. Where, I mean, he's done enough films to know that when you have an effort to, we're back to this thing about fanfic versus adaptation. You have this. What you don't want to do is to have the audience, pick out a scene, and because if you do that, it pulls the audience. It's like puncturing the reality of the film. And I think that that would happen if I think his effort was trying to get close to what Murnau was doing at the same time, not stepping into it.
And yet here we are, stepping out of the film, probably barely letting the drama of the film affect us when we were watching it, because we were doing the exact same thing that we both think the Eggers did not want us to do, which is to watch it with an eye towards how does this speak back over the past 100 years.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that I think Eggers was giving us a little Easter eggs here and there, but not. We want that. We want to hunt for the Easter egg. We don't want it to be given to us. So we're not going to show the scene of opening the door and having Orlok under the arch. That's giving you the Easter egg. We have to kind of have the camera pull through it, and then we see this arch on the side. So I do think he was very conscious of trying to avoid any absolutely direct connection there. And I think that was a smart idea.
Well, speaking of Easter eggs, one thing that has been made a lot about on the internet is, no, not the mustache, the chest biting, the lack of neck biting and the abundance of chest biting. Let's talk about that, where that might come from and what other influences Eggers may have been pulling in when he incorporated that into the film.
So one of the things that hasn't been talked about at all, as far as I know, is the connection of Eggers' Nosferatu and Sheridan LaFou's Carmilla. And I think that there's a really clear connection here. And Eggers we're back to this, he didn't have a sign that, the carriage moved through and said, Carmilla is living over in this castle over here.
He didn't name one of his characters Karnstein or anything like that.
Well, I think he did actually.
He did? Did I miss that?
Well, Karnstein, it's somebody from Carmilla. I have to look into that. I have to check that.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So I think that
wasn't the cat, was it?
There's about 3 references in the characters. The cat is one, and then there's a couple other. I know. For example, one of the people is named Friedrich.
Right. Right. You mentioned earlier that Friedrich harkens back to was the painter, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are all now that's an Easter egg for sure, or at least it could be complete coincidence, but I doubt it. But I think that when looking over this situation, I think the Carmilla connection is so strong that you could make an argument that there's, especially in the first half of the film, there's more Carmilla going on here than there is Bram Stoker. For example,
that very first scene.
From the very first scene, as a teenager, or a girl is quite young and she has a dream, which is exactly what happens in Carmilla. And then later on, you have the scenes of the blood sucking from the chest, which harkens back to folk vampirism and the incubus succubus idea. And that happens in Carmilla too. They suck from the chest or the breast, and so that to me is a direct connection. And finally, you have the vampire hunter scene, where you have the vampire hunters go and they're looking for the coffin, and they have some kind of magical way to find it. I mean, the horse and so on, which is not exactly in Sheridan Le Fanu's novel, but the scene is the same. They find the coffin and they stake the vampire, and there's lots of blood, which is similar to what happens in the movie. So there's a lot going on here. The only difference is the gender switching, because in Carmilla it was one woman grooming or preying on another woman, and then that was not the case here.
Right. I definitely see the echoes of Carmilla in that initial scene where we understand the backstory between Ellen and Orlok. I don't see it as much in the hunt that takes place in the woods. Because that seemed to be, to me, it seemed to be more of a nod towards folklore than it did to be a nod towards fiction. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that was what was going on. But that cat that kept showing up, I did think of Carmilla every time that cat was on screen, because I thought, what is this cat doing here? What's the connection here?
We're both right, because Le Fanu pulls his story from folklore. And so, that is all, it's all true. Eggers could have been, I'm sure Eggers knows Carmilla well because of the beginning of the movie. So he knows that, but he also knows the folklore stories. So, it all kind of melds together.
Yeah, we cannot ever accuse Eggers of not doing his research. Even if we don't like his conclusions, even if you don't like his films that much, you can't argue that the guy does not read up before he starts making a movie.
In interviews I've heard him, he's mentioned Emily Gerard, he's mentioned the Biedermeier period. He mentions all the things that are not in the normal kind of, when you do a little amateur research on this, you'll get only to a certain level, and obviously he's way past that. Of course, he's been looking at this since he was a teenager, so he's had a time. He and you and I, we've all had time to kind of bury ourselves deep into this.
Well, he should have been asking Lokke Heiss about some of these things, because then he would have at least known about the court case and what did or did not happen to all those films, et cetera, et cetera.
I haven't heard him say that part of the story. He's not brought it up in an interview, so I'm going to say that he might actually be aware of that. I think that Eggers is way more interested in the narrative itself. I mean, I think, although at some point it would be fun to get him to talk to him about it and see that. But I mean that everything I've heard him talk about tells me that he's completely clued into all the details that we've mentioned. Yeah.
So let's talk about that ending, Lokke, because there's a million different interpretations I have read online. I have my own. I recorded it here, but I want to hear what you have to say and what your interpretation is of the Eggers film contrasted with the original 1922 Murnau film.
So this is a contract narrative. That is, Murnau's film is absolutely a contract narrative, which means that the action moves after one or the actors make a decision about themselves and about everybody else. So at the end of this contract narrative, Orlok stays until the cock crows. Then that's the deal. The way to kill him is to do that. He does that, and that's essentially what kills him. That is, he loses his power, becomes susceptible to damage, whatever. And when the light hits him, it goes up into a puff of smoke. But it's not the light itself that does that. I mean, arguably, if he had been exposed to light at some other point, not related to him staying there overnight, the light might have been bad for him, but it wouldn't have killed him.
That's the argument I would make as well. So I'm heartened to hear you say that.
Right. I mean, there's a clue, although it could be a sheer coincidence, because that when the cock crows and he gets up kind of startled and goes, "Oh, I blew it." And then you see his picture in the mirror. So his image in the mirror. And you can make the argument that Murnau might have even done that on purpose, because that tells us he's no longer the double. That is, these powers have been lost. So that's an indication that he's going to, he doesn't have any ability that he used to. And then when he turns around, then gets into the light, then poof, he's gone. Because as doubles disappear, you have an annihilation of the two opposing selves, and they become one again. And typically, that fusion means they're dead. So that means
So who was Orlok the double of then?
Well, that's what makes the story interesting, because it's not clear whether it's Hutter or Ellen, but at the end of the story, it's clear that it's Ellen's projection of who Hutter is. So she wants a person so it's a projection of Hutter, but it's done through Ellen's desire.
Something just occurred to me. I'm with you, but I have to ask this question. I have to assume that Ellen first calls out for a guardian angel. I'm talking about the Eggers version now. Ellen calls out for a guardian angel before she even knows Hutter, long before they're married, clearly. So is Orlok's first encounter with her as in his shadow form what she thinks her mate should be, and then she grafts that on to Thomas later?
Yeah, well, now you've hit the theme of this is what is evil within us, or is it from beyond? And then in your reading, you've described that as within us, and that is the shadow that she creates as a teenager, and that becomes, and then Hutter in this version is sort of a guy who just comes along and falls in love with someone with special powers, causes, but it's clearly you wouldn't you say her double, but it's her shadow figure, and that is the fulfillment finally at the end. But she becomes the angel of death. He is death, and when you consummate that, you get death.
If I'm understanding you right, Orlok counts as the doppelganger for Ellen, but she is also a projection of what Ellen wants her lover, her Thomas, to be.
Yes, and in Eggers' version, I think Thomas is just a kind of at the wrong place at the wrong time. I think in Murnau's version, it's a little more complex, because you have Hutter, the Thomas Hutter there plays a ineffectual or impotent husband, and so she has her choice between the nice guy who's impotent and the very so he's so potent that he's sort of deadly potent, Graf Orlok. So the idea of doubles, I think, is one more reason to think of this movie, both Murnau's film and Eggers' film, as completely steeped in German Romanticism. Maybe that's a kind of a more clarified way of saying it than throwing out the Biedermeier comment. This is German Romanticism where doubles abound, and in these stories, they're very much also very Gothic, and we haven't talked much about that. But Gothic is all about repression, and then you hide from some kind of fear. This movie is Gothic all the way through. It is in Murnau's case too, but the Gothic elements are much more. They're more signposts than they are very clarified. I think that they are there, but they sort of they run by so fast that they're kind of easy to miss. And I think that's maybe one reason why it gets labeled so easily as expressionistic. The Gothic elements are very clear in how the movie, the tableaus are set up, because Caspar David Friedrich does a lot of that, with the paintings. So you see the Gothic there with the arches and the castle, the ruined castles, and so on. Eggers, I think, makes a really strong point that he's making a Gothic story.
He gets a lot of the baggage from your classic Gothic tales. You get a noble person or a person of high birth from an olden time coming into effect. I don't know if middle class is the right word, but respectable but not aristocracy society. That seems to happen in a lot of Gothic tales. You've got the Gothic double. You've got the ruins. Plague does not seem to be a thing that happens in a lot of Gothic tales, but sickness does. Illnesses, whatever syndromes.
Right. Well, it's all about you have this repression of some desire the person who's repressed finds a hiding place, typically a house or castle, and then they find that it's the return of the repressed, that whatever they're trying to hide will find them. The castle becomes closing on until the last castle, the last edifice to keep yourself from these gothic fears is the body itself, and then the body, is invaded and you die. And the most quintessential version of that would be the Mask of the Red Death.
Mm.
In that case, the fear is the fear of death, or the fear of not being pure. So I think that most Gothic has some version of that going on. And you see this in abundance with Eggers' thing, because you have her ambivalence, at the very beginning, she's attracted to this, but on the same level, she's very repulsed by Orlok, who has is really more. Eggers is coming in from the folk horror door, and he wants to show a vampire from the folk era, of the folk version of this, where they come out of the coffins and they're looking like zombies.
I appreciate that so much.
He did not want this to be the vampire that you could sort of have at a social dinner with fish and soup, and he would do well. But
it's kind of, we talked about this a little bit, but it's sort of a return to horrid vampires after a very long period of sexy, magnetic, beautiful vampires. We're finally coming back around to vampires being terrifying again.
He tried to make that authentic, like what would a person do if you're from that time period. That is the Morlock, and I think that him having the mustache was exactly the reason why, because he wants Orlok to be of that period. A count who at that era would absolutely be wearing a mustache or have a mustache. So,
or maybe he was a firefighter. We don't know.
Well, I think he certainly has the virality of in some way. Maybe,
thank you for your service, Captain Orlok.
Yes, for sure. But I think that people were laughing at the mustache, but I think that that's one of the things where Eggers just things the hard way, because he doesn't. Not that he doesn't care. He wants to make his point. He wants this to be authentic, and I think that really works in the long run, because he has the things you'd expect somebody to be buried in, but he looks like a corpse. But he also has the sort of the face, if you opened up the coffin, of somebody who would really be from that time era. So I give him points for that.
Yeah, I wasn't as bothered by the mustache. I certainly noticed it, and I thought, does he have a big old bushy mustache? And then I was fine with it after that.
It was in the novel, and as it and it was from the period,
and the novel Dracula for those at home, yeah.
But I mean, of course, a mustache and beard were probably more common in 1897 too, and so there is when you make a movie or any kind of art like this, you can't. You're not trying to be realistic. I had, when I was in Los Angeles, they talked about how it was important that you had to be able to strike some kind of balance. For example, I'm going to give you a secret with nothing to do with Nosferatu, but you'll never see movies the same way again, is when people in movies have luggage. You'll notice now that I'm telling it that the luggage is always empty. And the only way it would not be empty if there's something in the plot where they have something heavy. Obviously, they have to, but in any other moment, the luggage will always be empty, and it has to be empty. And the reason is because if you actually had things in there, they would be pulling at it, and the audience would see that and would take away from whatever else is going. They'd be looking at you having to carry something heavy, and that's not what you want. Because when you're acting in a movie, it's all about cheating.
Well, it only annoys me. It doesn't bother me if someone's carrying something down by their side, but when I see them lift something like a box. And it's not that I don't believe that the person is strong enough. It's just, it just comes up and there's no resistance. They don't have to lean back. There's nothing with the legs. That's when I get taken out of the picture, is when I see that happen. So we're way off the topic here, but we're not off the topic. We're not off the topic, Lokke, because in 1922, Orlok picks up a coffin like it's nothing and carries it over his shoulder, or I think it's under his arm, like it's nothing. And boy, I believe in the supernatural up until that point, and that's when I check out and I say, this movie no longer makes sense.
I think most of us laugh when we see it the first time. Of course, this is all psychically going on anyway. You see another scene where he disappears with the coffin into space. So I guess if he can walk through walls, he could certainly handle coffins.
Why not?
Why not? Exactly. I wanted to make one more point about the thing about the era that we're talking about, and what German Romanticism, whatever, whether is it expressionist or German Romanticism. I think that one answer for this is that when he had the costume ball to celebrate the end of the film, and the premiere of the film.
Well, okay, we're talking about when the film was originally released in 1922.
Yeah, so they had a big party, and there's a ad, or when people got their invitations to the party, it said in the invitation, "Costume ball, please come wearing Biedermeier costumes."
Oh wow!
Now,
there's your smoking gun.
Absolutely. I mean, so the premier doesn't say, "We want you to come dressed as Dr. Caligari."
Right.
Which actually could have been that. You have things where that's going on. It's called Caligarism. No. They don't have. The invitation says, "Please come." It's a costume ball. Please come in Biedermeier outfits. So I think that is, as much smoking gun as you're going to get. That the people the filmmakers who were doing the film, understood very clearly that they were using expressionist techniques in the stuff we talked about. So it wasn't like, they were saying, we're just going to do because there was no movie making in 1838, right? But expressionism quickly had been modified itself, is that we're going to talk about emotions, we're going to exaggerated feelings. And so that dovetailed in with the Romanticism. So in that sense, there was no conflict there. They wanted to make it from Romanticism period. They used expressionism as the technique, which was completely appropriate for the time. So in the end, it all dovetails out. The movie can be what you want it to be. It's expressionist and romanticist at the same time.